This is a Leckey Forum of the Alliance for Housing Solutions, Finding the Missing Middle, Expanding Housing Options for Middle-Income Households. So I'm going to get started. So one of the things that I wanted to ask really quickly for the folks in the room, I wanted to get a sense of who's here with us today. How about if you're an architect, raise your hand or stand up. So we've got a good number of architects. How about on the developer side, the private sector developers, either nonprofit or for-profit? Okay. How about the public sector side? Planners, et cetera. Okay, lots of public sector folks, that's great. How about some other professionals like researchers or policy analysts? Got a few of those? Okay. How about Arlington residents who are just curious about what's going on? Great, we have a good turnout on that end. And then my other question is, how many of you is this the first time at an AHS event? Okay, that's a good turnout too. Yay, welcome. Okay, so just very, very quickly, you have some information in your program about who AHS is. Any AHS board members I want to invite to stand up and say hello. One that I should point out is Takis right here. Karantonis is not only a board member, but he's one of our tech specialists for today, so we get our board members actively involved. I saw that we had a county board member here. Is Jay Fassett somewhere? Oh, way in the back, and I haven't seen if any other county board members came in since I started, but if you are here, hello and welcome. We're glad you're able to join us today. I want to make sure that we thank our sponsors. Gary O'Hara Family Foundation, the AHC and APA, and VHDA, Habitat for Humanity, and Wesley have been supporters of our event today and our other Missing Middle activities for the month of October. And our partners, we couldn't have done anything without the Arlington County Division of Community Planning, Housing, and Development, who we'll hear from Steve Cover in just a minute. Arlington Independent Media is here, videotaping the event so that it will be available afterwards. For anybody who's interested in learning more, we'll be following up with everybody to let you know when that's available. And in particular, Mr. Michael Shea, who is our director/producer. He's out here somewhere. Thank you very much. And then the Lee Highway Alliance. We have a lot of representatives of the Lee Highway Alliance here who have been a partner of ours in working through some of the missing middle examples, and we'll be working a lot on missing middle issues with the Lee Highway Alliance. So we're very pleased to have you guys here. Very quickly, one other person that I want to make sure I recognize is AHS staff who are working here today. Stephanie Boyer is out in the front if you have any questions about details of the day or anything, if you need any help with anything, she's in the front. Kate Dorrell is our communications maven who has helped with everything, and so I want to give her a big shout out. She's also manning some cameras today. She's our connection to Arlington Independent Media, so say hi to Kate, and thank you, Kate. So why are we here? We're talking about the missing middle, and when I define the missing middle, and we'll hear a lot more about this from our main speakers, we're really talking about two concepts that are tied together. One is the concept of scale, and the scale of housing, which you can see us talking about in our gallery examples out in the front, are between single-family homes and mid-rise apartments. So this is a graph that shows you the breakdown of detached single-family homes here, attached single-family homes, and this is for Arlington. So owners, primarily detached, renters, primarily 10 units or more. So this is just an illustration of the missing part that we're talking about. So we're talking about these physical structures is the first piece of what we're talking about. And then the second piece that we're talking about is how, if we were able to have more of that missing middle type housing, we might be able to better serve middle income households in a community like Arlington. So we're tying those two pieces together, both the physical form and scale, and then the ability to serve middle income people in Arlington. So this is, again, just looking at the bulk of Arlington renters and owners in the 120 AMI and up category. So we have a very high income community here. We have a decent number of, quite a few renters in the below 60% of AMI category. And again, when we're talking about middle, we're referring to generally starting at the 60 and 80% AMI up to 80 and 100% of AMI. AMI is the area median income. So the median income is right about here. It's about 120,000, 100,000, depending on the size of your family. So these are the incomes that we're talking about. We're hoping that we'll be able to serve more. And so we have an introduction from Mr. Stephen Cover, who is the head of Arlington's Community Planning, Housing and Development Division. And so I'll pass it over to you to say hello.
Great, thank you very much. How is everybody this morning? Good, good. It looks like a good turnout this morning. Yeah, I'd just like to give just a general introduction, and then we'll dive into the program here. Access to affordable housing at all income levels in both the rental and home ownership category is really fundamental. I mean, it's fundamental in terms of maintaining our neighborhoods, stabilizing our workforce, creating greater economic prosperity and opportunities. I mean, it really is critical. And it allows for our community to reap the benefits of expanded affordable housing choices, which is something that's really essential, particularly here in Arlington. It also provides residents the opportunities to reduce their living expenses. And what I mean by that is, I know when I was in Georgia, this was about 10 years ago, we actually did a detailed detailed study on affordable housing. And if affordable housing had been located in the areas where the jobs were and where the opportunities were, and not spread out all over the suburbs, this was back in 2004. It would, just in transportation costs, it would save those families $7,000 to $8,000 a year. In addition to an hour and a half a day, you multiply that times 5, 7.5, 8 hours a week of time just going to and from work. So it goes way beyond just the benefits and job opportunities and things like that, but also the quality of life. Home ownership for low and middle income households has clearly been diminishing due to the rapidly rising home prices, but the demand is still really strong. And we can see that throughout all areas here in the county. For households with incomes between 80 and 120% AMI, the county is expecting in the next 20 years to add about 5,500 households. That's a lot of households. And so as the program goes on during the day, obviously one of the key pieces of this is providing housing and affordable housing for that large group that is going to be moving to Arlington County. In response to this and other key trends, last year the county board adopted our first affordable housing master plan. Really, I think a spectacular product that really lays out some terrific strategies on how to move forward and provide affordable housing to the county. And it certainly includes incentives for moderately priced housing through really a series of land use and zoning policy recommendations. I think you can see that as we get into this, some of the examples out front on the boards that are on the easels of different opportunities and different housing types that actually could be part of the future growth of Arlington County and provide that affordable housing. We have to be creative in this and come up with creative solutions because they still need to be developed. Conventional zoning, conventional land use policies aren't going to do it. So today, and really through the rest of this month, we have a chance and we have opportunities to weigh in on these different alternatives and new housing types. I know in my career working in Maryland and Georgia and Wisconsin, they're all different types of housing that can take on affordable housing needs and really meet those needs. A lot of those housing types aren't here in Arlington today. And so that's really, one of the things that we're going to be exploring in greater detail. And it's not just housing types, but smaller units, smaller lot sizes, accessory dwelling proposals, things like that. These are all part of putting together that true, meaningful, affordable housing package that we're trying to do here. So anyway, I think this is exciting. This is a critical time in Arlington County, and I know we can do it, certainly with, all of you out there and all the creativity that we have in this county. I know we can pull this off. So thank you very much.
Our keynote speaker today, Daniel Parolek, who is the principal of Opticos Design. He's a nationally recognized leader on this topic and the creator of the missingmiddlehousing.com website. And we'll hear a lot more about all of his experience and what he has to share with us and ideas from across the country right now. Thank you, Daniel.
Well, good morning. It's great to be in Arlington today talking about missing middle housing. I coined this term about 5 years ago now and really had no idea how quickly and rapidly and widespread this concept would be utilized across the country. And what I like about it is communities are taking the concept and adapting it to help them address the housing conversations in their communities. And like here in Arlington, like Michelle mentioned, missing middle initially was about the form and the scale and the range of the building types. But it definitely is a tool that communities are and have been using to address the needs of affordability, especially in that middle income range. So it's great to see the spread of this concept. And I think more than anything, it's given communities the ability to talk about housing choice in a way that's not scary, not using terms like density, not using terms like multifamily, not using terms like upzoning, right? If you've ever read a book by George Lakoff, he wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant, about sort of how to frame a political debate in a way that you can actually win it. I can guarantee if you go into a conversation in a community talking about the need for more housing and talk about increasing density and talk about introducing multifamily, I can guarantee you will not come out of that process with a successful result. And so I think missing middle housing has given communities the tool to do just that. And so even though the coin missing middle housing was coined only about 5 years ago, the concept of this range of missing middle housing types has been inherent in my urban design and architecture practice at Opticos for almost 20 years now. And I like to tell this story to kick off my missing middle presentation because it was a really great way that this concept of these missing middle housing types changed the conversation in a master planning and form-based coding project we're working on there's a community of Isla Vista. It's in Santa Barbara County. We were hired to do a master plan for this community that's adjacent to UC Santa Barbara, and we were hired to do the master plan and the form-based code. And the first time we came into a meeting with the citizen advisory group that the county had actually put into place prior to us being hired, the citizen advisory group came at us really, really hard and said, we don't want more than 17 dwelling units per acre in Isla Vista. It kind of took us off guard, and then we started thinking about this. Well, what is magic about 17 dwelling units per acre, and why isn't it 16.9 or 16.5? And what's so scary about 17.5 or 18 that they don't want in their community? And so we wanted to kind of peel away and get away from talking about a number and actually talk about what it is exactly that they want and how we can reinforce that in the master plan in the form-based code. So we took them on a walking tour, and I'd recommend anytime you're having a conversation about this, the best thing to do is take groups on walking tours. And we walked through downtown adjacent neighborhoods in Santa Barbara, nearby Santa Barbara. We saw great bungalow courts, we saw great fourplexes, we saw great eightplexes, mansion apartments, and ultimately we ended up in front of this great little courtyard apartment building and actually saw a number of these, not this style, obviously not Spanish Revival, but great brick courtyard buildings as I was walking here from my hotel this morning. And the citizen advisory group said, this is exactly what we want in Isla Vista. If you can do a master plan and write a form-based code that gets us this, we'll support the project. And so we do the nerdy thing that we do as planners, urban designers, and architects. We climb around the back and we count the meters. You know, we go up and we count the doorbells as a double check. And and of course, somebody will always come out of one of the apartments because there's a community there and they're sort of looking out for each other and ask you what you're doing. And once you tell them what you're doing, they're fine. And sort of, it's usually they're so excited about the place they're living, they don't want to stop talking about it. So I said, do you realize that this apartment building is almost 50 dwelling units per acre? Almost 3 times, more than 3 times as much as they thought was the maximum density that they wanted to allow in their community. And so that immediately gave us the opportunity to step back away from that scary density and that number and talk about these missing middle housing types. And that's just a really great, and we were able to create an effective master plan and a code to implement that for them. So what are some of the problems and why is missing middle housing so important for communities to be talking about? Right, there's a tremendous mismatch between what the market wants and what we are providing. And I would say it's a little less so here in the DC metro area, but a lot of studies have shown, and this is just one example, and I think this is actually low, that there is a 20 to 35% gap between the supply of walkable urban living and the demand. And so you can do a really simple supply and demand equation and realize that the result of that is really high prices, right? And there's a tremendous affordability gap. And I think it's most evident here in the DC metro area. Actually, even, it's like San Francisco and DC, I think, have the 2 of the biggest sort of affordability issues right now. It doesn't take very long to figure out where your prices have gone in the last 10 or 15 years. I just went on to Trulia, which is a little online real estate site, right? And I Googled Arlington, Virginia, or put Arlington, Virginia in the search box, right? And there's almost nothing comes up for less than $800,000 and sort of going up. And I think this, $2.1 million 6-bedroom house might be one of those McMansion houses that we talked about in preparation for this call with the local organizers about, it sounds like there's actually single-family homes being torn down that are probably selling for what, 500,000 or 600,000, maybe 4 or 5, I don't know, 6, 7, and then being torn down and built and replaced with the $2.1 million. And so that's an extreme sign, or a sign of extreme affordability issues. And so really feel that and have been successful in working with communities to utilize the concept of missing middle housing to address sort of why that's happening and how you can sort of provide for more choices instead of these $2 million single family homes from being built. This is pretty scary. Sort of the Joint Center for Housing Study at Harvard has done a series of studies that shows by 2025 that 15 million people, this is across the United States, will be spending over half of their income on rent, right? That's pretty, and if you don't know, sort of the average is about 30%. An average family typically spends about 30% of their income on housing. And so this is getting really extreme, and if you add transportation costs on top of that, it gets even worse, right? And we're kind of pushing a lot of these folks who can't afford to live in the cities further out, and so their transportation costs are going up as well. And so the other interesting thing that's happening is that there's tremendous shifts in household demographics as well, and just a couple of them to sort of highlight here, and I'll tie it back into the missing middle concept through my presentation, is that nearly 30% of all households are single-person households. Now think about that. We've done a really great job of building big and building for kind of that nuclear family of the mom and the dad and the several kids. A third of our population, a third of our households have a single person in it. And the other way that that ties in is if you're requiring high parking, off-street parking requirements for your housing, let's say you're requiring 2 off-street parking spaces for your housing, that means that a third of your households probably, they have one person, so they probably have 1 car, and so you're kind of forcing that that parking need on households that actually don't have that level of ownership. 75 to 85% of households by 2025 will not have children, right? Almost, right, we're getting up to 90%. 9 out of 10 families will not have children. Now, imagine what those statistics do, what impact they have on the types of housing we need to be providing. It's really, really dramatic, right? And, our conventional and sort of our typical approach to planning and zoning really has not been effective in delivering these housing choices. So we need to think outside of the box. I'm going to give you some thoughts in a little bit about sort of what we can do to our zoning to remove the barriers and provide the opportunity for these missing middle types to happen. And so, right, conventional zoning, right, this is not Arlington, but any community I go in across the country, at some point in time, maybe the zoning got upzoned to multifamily or to medium density, and you got results like this, right? This building in the middle. And I think to a lot of community members, this type of low quality, incompatible multifamily infill is what community members think about when you say multifamily, when you say sort of apartment, when you say renter. For some reason, a lot of people, especially general community members, default back to this worst case scenario. And so missing middle housing and sort of rethinking the zoning sort of gives the communities the tool to kind of start breaking down those preconceived notions about housing choices in their communities. So what is missing middle housing? If you have the brochure, this diagram's in the little handout as well, but if it's not big enough for you to see, on your left-hand side of this diagram, in white, are the single-family detached. And I think we would all agree that historically we've done a great job of planning for and building single-family detached housing. On the far right-hand side, in the white, are the 4, 5, 6+ story, either all residential or sort of mixed use with ground floor retail. And over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, right, we've figured that out. And I think the DC metro area is a great sign of that. You've figured out how to do big. It's all of this stuff in the middle. It's that we call missing middle. It's the duplex, it's the fourplex, it's the mansion apartment, it's the cottage court, it's the courtyard apartment buildings that really have, very, very few of these have been built in the last 50 or 60 years for a number of different reasons. And I think the first and foremost one is zoning barriers, density-based systems, off-street parking requirements. But there's a lot of other obstacles, right? There's even the development industry, the development and building industry is not set up to deliver missing middle. We have production builders doing single family. We have production builders and sort of big developers doing multifamily. But the folks that we see delivering this missing middle are just kind of the one-off small local builders who are just kind of doing one lot at a time. And so there's a little bit of it being done, but it's not having the impact that it really needs. And if you go away from this session today with one idea about missing middle, this is it. It's that missing middle housing does not get bigger than the scale of a house. It just happens to have multiple units poured into that form. Right? It's compatible with the single family scale. And so that's a really important part of this concept. So the types, a stacked duplex. And I was having a hard time finding duplexes in my photo library of the DC area. And when Michelle showed the slides of percentage of residents in different types of housing, I think only 1% lived in duplexes. So I think the duplex actually has not historically been part of the vocabulary of types here, but it's something that could be introduced. But stacked duplex, right? You go in the right-hand side door, go up a flight of steps, and you have a unit on the top. You go on the door on the left, and that door enters the unit on the ground floor, right? And if you want to think about densities, we like to step away from density. But if you want to think about densities in terms of the output of this physical form, they generate about 19 dwelling units per acre on a typical sized lot. So it's actually pretty high. Right, the architecture, the style varies across the country. And the type will vary based on, like, is it appropriate? Like, how does the type need to behave on the lot? Is a front setback appropriate for a location? Does the side setback need to be small or big? And the architectural vocabulary will vary across the country as well. A side-by-side duplex, right, this is pretty straightforward. You know, it can be 1 story, it can be 2 stories. This is a nice version that has 2 about 750 square foot houses. Once again, it generates a density of about 19 units per acre. I found this type, and I would say it's a little bit big for a lot of context, but this is a local example of a side-by-side duplex. You know, it's not really bigger than the scale of a large house, and it generates about a similar density. Whoops, bungalow court, right? And once again, there aren't a lot of this actual missing middle type in the DC area, but there are a few of them. This is just simply a series of small, either detached or attached houses oriented around a shared green space. And this is just an aerial diagram so you can see this better. A series of small houses oriented around a shared green space. And what's interesting about these is even though they're only 1 story, and that the house footprints are usually no more than like 700 or 800 square feet, they generate densities of up to like the mid-30 dwelling units per acre. So they're actually very, very efficient types if you can design them with small units and actually design them with a low off-street parking requirement. So in terms of getting housing and affordable housing, they're really important. So the carriage house or the accessory dwelling unit, I think this is pretty straightforward. This is a conversation that I think is happening in a lot of communities across the country. It might be a unit on top of a garage. It might be a unit just in the back, the rear, behind a house. Just a really important part of thinking about how the missing middle at a very fine grain can be integrated into neighborhoods throughout a region. A fourplex. I really like this type, and I think this is one that we've sort of everybody's been challenged to build because it actually stacks units and is typically in condos. 2 units on the ground floor, left and right, and then 2 units stacked on the top. It's a pretty basic type, typically on about a 60 by 100 foot lot at a minimum. Generates a density of about 30 dwelling units per acre. When we were I was in Portland last week, and we saw a similar example in Dallas as we were doing a walking tour, is right next to this building, and you can see the yellow brick, there was a building that was the exact same size, exact same width, exact same depth, exact same height. The architecture was different. And so we thought it was another fourplex, but when we actually stopped to document it as a group, we realized that the building next to it actually had 8 studio apartments in it, as opposed to this one that had 4 one-bedroom apartments. And so the interesting thing about that is even though the size was exactly the same and the form was and scale was exactly the same, that 8-unit building generated a density of almost 70 dwelling units per acre. And it was this size, right? And if you say 70 dwelling units per acre, this little building here is not what most people think about. So this is why we need to get away from that sort of that measure of density in terms of how we plan and zone for our housing. So multiplex small, right? Sort of getting to the upper end of the spectrum of missing middle. These are typically like 8 to 10 to 12 unit apartment buildings, sort of very carefully integrated along corridors, maybe on the end grains of blocks. Once again, generate about the densities of about mid 30 units per acre. Then you have the townhouse, right? In the DC area, right? They've figured out the townhouse. It's been an important part of the vocabulary of missing middle here. But you know, as everywhere else, right? You start to see really bad examples, right? You cram the car in the bottom level. You try to see how many of these you can get onto a vacant lot. They don't face the street. The fronts face the backs. And so you have to be a little bit careful with these, but they are an important part of the vocabulary of missing middle. And what I would say is that, especially in a place like the DC area, is that not all townhouses should be the same. So as you're thinking about planning for, designing, and even writing zoning for, you might actually split up townhouses into different subcategories, because this is a townhouse example from Detroit, Michigan. And it behaves more like a single-family house because it has a deep setback. It only goes a certain length and then the building stops, so it feels like a freestanding building, as opposed to sort of the typical pattern here, which is kind of a continuous string of row houses. So in terms of form and scale, thinking very carefully about the type and even the subclassifications is really, really important. So a couple important characteristics of missing middle housing. Number one is these types perform best when they're in a walkable context. And right, that's part of the reason. I think that's pretty straightforward, right? It's Linda Pruitt, who is the developer who owns the Cottage Company, which is based in the Seattle area. She said the first question that her potential buyers ask is, what can I walk to? Right? It might be a coffee shop, it might be a grocery store, it might be an entire main street of commercial amenities. But right, these types function the best and they're in the highest demand in places that are walkable. And you have a lot of walkable places here and even more that are transforming into walkable that would be great opportunities for missing middle housing. The second characteristic is a lower perceived density, and I think this is just a theme that's been throughout my presentation, right? This is an interesting little project in Norfolk, Virginia that some of you may have seen. It's called East Beach. This is a little fourplex unit on the left, and it's on a block that has big single-family houses on it, and several of these fourplexes and sixplexes have been carefully inserted into that neighborhood. And so it sort of provides housing choice and is very compatible even with the single-family homes. Small footprint buildings, really, really important, right? One way that conventional zoning fails to deliver missing middle, especially in kind of medium density and multifamily zones, is that when a lot gets bigger, there's usually not any regulations that limit the size in terms of the width and the depth of a building. There's usually side setbacks, right? But if the lot gets bigger, that means your building can get bigger. So it's actually really, really important when you're regulating for missing middle housing to define and regulate a maximum width and a maximum depth as well as the height. So that if a lot gets bigger, it doesn't mean that you can't do more units. It means that you need you can utilize and integrate multiple buildings as opposed to one large building. And that's a really, really important concept for missing middle, right? Because density does not have to equal big. I think that's one of the messages here. Higher densities can equal small footprint buildings. Small, well-designed units, I think there's a couple of things. Is the only time we've seen missing middle projects fail financially is when a developer has taken a suburban unit plan or a suburban building type and tried to plan it into a more walkable urban context. So it's usually too big, it costs them too much to build, and they price themselves out of the market, and the market's not actually looking for that big unit anyway. So small units are an important part of this sort of missing middle discussion. And right, the other thing that we, as we do work with our developer clients, is that most of them default to the notion that small equals lowest end of the market. And it can provide some level of affordability, but there's also a large percentage of the market that's looking for smaller, high quality units. And so that's a message that we often have to repeat to our private sector clientele. Fewer off-street parking spaces. I can't imagine anybody in this room has ever had a heated discussion in their community about off-street parking. Right? I don't need to talk about this, right? These types, the missing middle types, are not financially viable with high off-street parking requirements. They just will not pencil out. You will not get them. And in a market like this, I would say that if you go higher than one off-street parking space per unit, you won't get missing middle, and ideally you go even lower based on land values, construction costs. And somebody should do those numbers. It'd be great to do some testing on existing lot sizes, but just this is a really important part of the conversation. And like one of the things we did recently in Austin, Texas, we're rewriting the citywide zoning code, land development code, is that we actually did a series of massing diagrams to show and sort of ran the financial numbers about for every 0.5 off-street parking spaces you require, how much the cost of either the rent or the for sale of a unit goes on a lot. And it went up pretty substantially, going from 0.5 spaces per unit up to 1.5 spaces per unit. So that's an exercise you could do here as well to show the impact that off-street parking requirements have on affordability. They create community, right? Some of the projects like this, which is one of the cottage company's projects, that's a pocket neighborhood, and there's an example of it out front as well, right? They create community, they have a shared community room, they have a shared green space, and a lot of these are co-housing projects, and I think they're really fantastic. But a lot of the missing middle types, they simply create community within the building. Like I said, whenever I'm out sort of either photographing or documenting by myself or with a group, courtyard apartment, bungalow court, one of those residents will inevitably come out, and because they're observing and sort of it's the passive security sort of observation, they'll ask what I'm doing, and they are always very, very passionate about that community, that building that they live in. And I often joke that if we did a block party sort of survey for neighborhoods that have a rich diversity of missing middle types, that the neighborhoods with the higher percentage of missing middle types would probably have a higher block party ratio per year than neighborhoods that actually don't. And I live in one of those, and we have a lot of great block parties. So removing barriers with good zoning, and all of us need to be thinking about this. And what this is really about, it's about sharpening the pencil, because the way that I see this is that a majority of our zoning codes are like these dull pencils. Like, they worked when the market wasn't so hot. They worked when the paradigm was to get us a little bit more towards suburban development. But now that we need complex, diverse, walkable urban environments, we need to sharpen that pencil. Even regulating by density disincentivizes small units, because if a developer let's say a developer has a 50-foot by 120-foot lot, and he can build 4 units. Do you think he's going to build 4 small affordable units, or 4 of the biggest units that he can deliver, right? And so why not take away that density and say, well, on a 50 by 100-foot lot, like, we're going to give him a range of missing middle housing types so that he could either build 4 bigger units, or he could build 6 or 8 smaller or medium-sized units at the same scale. You know, being very careful and diligent about that. So, right, the development standards get in the way. If you give me your zoning code, it'll take me about 15 minutes to find a handful of barriers within your development standards. It's not hard to do. These numbers weren't very carefully calibrated. And even in zones that typically or hypothetically allow multi-unit buildings, the minimum lot sizes are usually too big to actually financially enable or allow the missing middle types, right? And the other aspect of the zoning is the mapping. Oops. So we can fix the development standards, but we also need to fix and kind of rethink the mapping. This doesn't like this. Oh, there it is. So, right, for those of you who are planners, are your zoning maps a mess? Right? Right? Over the course of 60, 70, 80 years, right, there's been some spot zoning. There's been, like, we have like a patch of orange, then a couple yellow spots in between. An important part of fixing our zoning is just that sharpening of the pencil is getting more fine grain about how we map zones that will enable missing middle housing. And it's just an important part of the zoning strategy, and thinking more carefully about where we are allowing them. Because instead of doing the broad brush stroke colors that are inherent in a lot of zoning maps, we need to get more fine grain. And we always find ourselves when we're updating a citywide zoning code or doing even a neighborhood-specific form-based code, of going very carefully along all the boundaries of those zones and making adjustments. So what I would say is when this next slide comes up is that the most effective way that we have found to regulate and zone for missing middle housing is by using form-based coding. And I know that there is some local experience with form-based coding, but let me tell you why. So the first part of our form-based coding process is an extensive documentation and analysis of the existing inventory of all of the building types that exist in your community. And those building types are the ingredients for the different types of neighborhoods or places in your community. They're the kit parts, the ingredients, however you want to look at it. And so in Cincinnati, as an example, we had 20 different building types. Each of the rectangles on the right-hand side here represent a new form-based zoning district, and in black are the zoning districts that each of the building types are allowed in. And so, just as an example, this is one of the new form-based districts, a T4 neighborhood, small footprint, illustrative intent, and it directly allows a range of, in this instance, missing middle housing types, and then ties it back to a minimum lot size. So this is a really direct way to get to and allow the range of missing middle housing types you want in a specific area, as opposed to the indirect way of saying, we want 30 units per acre, we want 35, we want an FAR of 1.5 or 0.5 or 0.25. This is just the direct way to do this, and to be honest, I haven't seen another system, and we've tried other ways to be as effective in integrating missing middle housing. So, right, lots of great resources. You can buy the book that I co-authored on Amazon. Planetizen is an online resource that we did a webinar for recently. The Form-Based Code Institute is a nonprofit organization that I'm a board member of that has a lot of free available information online as well. So I just encourage you to take a look at that. So considering where and how to apply missing middle housing. And these are just a couple examples. I could give a whole presentation about this, but right there are secondary corridors. You know, this could be almost anywhere in the United States, kind of defunct auto-oriented uses, sort of derelict houses, really opportunities here. And right, the comprehensive plan or the regional plan for an area may say we want really big here, but a lot of areas might be a little bit further from transit, might be adjacent to more single family, may say this middle scale is what we're looking for here, but we can allow that place to evolve, right? You integrate mixed use, but it's not 6-story mixed use, it's 3- and 4-story mixed use, and you use the missing middle housing to provide the number of rooftops that will support those local amenities and make that area transit supportive. So even if the transit's not there, that ultimately that transit could show up, and that threshold is usually about 16 dwelling units per acre average. And so, right, along secondary corridors, missing middle is a really great tool to integrate sort of those commercial amenities and to provide housing choices within communities, right? And they also, and this is a great conversation here, this is a major corridor. It's a transit corridor. It's been zoned for, you know, higher intensity residential and mixed use. The great thing about it is you think about missing middle is it's great to have those big buildings and all those people along the corridor, but you have these single family houses existing back here. You know, you can utilize missing middle as a transitional scale from that large or extra large down to this small, right? It's like large, medium, small. It's a really basic concept in terms of the transitions. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I'm thrilled that different organizations, different entities are latching onto this concept, and it's being utilized in many, many different ways across the country. The state of Michigan, I encourage you to get online for this, it's using it they have a statewide place-based economic development strategy. It's called My Place, M-I as in Michigan Place. So if you just Google My Place, it'll come up. But they have this, it's been in place for almost 10 years now. They've done a lot of education, a lot of implementation of form-based coding, but they're also utilizing missing middle housing as one of the tools to help them implement this strategy. And they actually sponsored the first ever missing middle housing design competition last year, which was a really cool process. And so, right, comprehensive plans, right? I talked about sharpening the points of our zoning, but our comprehensive plans in terms of our land use, right, need to be more carefully thought about as well. Nashville, Tennessee, Rick Bernhard, if you might know him, retired recently, but they did a comprehensive plan for their city and utilized missing middle housing as one of the tools in their toolbox to provide affordable housing in Nashville, because they have a really hot market as well. And so other recommendations that I make is that, right, if you're going to take a land use approach versus a form-based approach to your comprehensive plan, make sure you divide up your land use category so that you might have a high density, unlimited size land use category But then you might have a high to medium density, small footprint land use category as a very basic concept, right? You can have the higher densities, but make sure some of those areas as appropriate are small and medium footprint missing middle buildings. So just a really interesting strategy. Right, builders are integrating missing middle housing into their product portfolios. We're getting calls from a couple different spectrums here. The single family builders on one end are calling us and saying, we can't deliver single family homes for a price that the entry level market can afford, and they can't even deliver a conventional townhouse for a price. And so they're wanting to understand how they can integrate missing middle housing into their product portfolio. So one really cool project is in Salt Lake City, where we're working with who's historically been a single family home builder to integrate missing middle into their product portfolio. The first project's coming out of the ground. It's actually outselling their conventional townhouse product. So it's performing in that way. On the other side of the spectrum, we have apartment builders who are thinking about, everything we build can't be big. The larger sites are taken. How can we think more fine grain? So we're working with apartment builders to integrate missing middle housing into their sort of portfolios as well. And sort of that's the upper end of the missing middle spectrum. And this is an 8-unit mansion apartment that's part of a larger missing middle neighborhood that we're working on with a developer in Omaha, Nebraska, right? If there's demand for this in Omaha in the Midwest, right? They don't have the hot real estate markets we have, but they have place, and sort of even the builders there are thinking about this, right? And even your local developers, we're actually in conversation with several of them, are challenged, right? The call is always, we can't deliver a townhouse for under $1 million, right, here in the DC, or 800,000 if you're a little bit further out. And so what is it within this range of missing middle that can enable more affordability and provide more choice outside of the single family, the row house, and then big condo building, right? And so we're working with a local developer to actually introduce sort of more affordability and more missing middle into their product portfolios. So, right, cities are using this in their affordable housing toolbox. One of the cool things we're doing in Austin, Texas, as part of the citywide land development code update, is we've created a missing middle housing, affordable housing density bonus, so that if a builder wants to build more units within that envelope that we've defined, if they achieve certain affordability thresholds, they can pour more units into that building envelope. So this is a really cool system, and this is being driven by two really talented firms, Echo Northwest and Fragonese and Associates. Just really great to be working with them. Right, and the final point here is that even organizations like AARP is utilizing missing middle housing in their conversations to their constituency, and this is really big, right? There's a lot of members of AARP, but right, as part of their livable communities, I was here almost a year ago, speaking at their livable communities conference, and so it's an important part. And that was important last week with AARP. It's an important part of their conversation to their aging constituency. So concluding thoughts, right? If you want to start this dialogue in your community, start by taking pictures. Most community members can relate to pictures, right? Take a catalog of pictures for each of these types, put them in posters, and start having a conversation about missing middle. Michelle mentioned the website. Just encourage you to use this as a reference, missingmiddlehousing.com. We kind of got tired of getting calls and having to field calls about what is missing middle. Can you send us photos? A lot of free downloadable information. Just encourage you to take a look at it. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. Great quote. And this was in a publication by the Urban Land Institute that was published about 5 or 6 years ago called What's Next? And I think this kind of sums it up. It's time to rethink and evolve and reinvent and renew. And I think that we as planners, we as architects, we as community members, we as decision makers, like we all need to step up and challenge ourselves to rethink the way we do things to deliver missing middle housing, both in terms of affordability, providing more housing choices generally, because right, the market is waiting, and the real question is, will your communities respond? Because I think that the communities that will respond will ultimately have the best economic futures. So I think I'm just challenging all to be part of the solution. Thank you.